мы едем на родину, на свою родину всех евреев. Да, не потому, что здесь болеют или что, а потому, что все евреи должны жить в своем государстве, там, где будет им именно безопасно.
We are getting immigrants currently at the rate of between 25,000 to 30,000 a month. I hope we finish this month of December with about 30,000 people. That means about 1,000 people a day. That means every 60 seconds or so, another immigrant in the country. We expect to have 1 million people in 3 years, by the end of 3 years.
Сейчас, вот год-два назад всех евреев и русских затянул какой-то массовый психоз. Один поехал, это пошла цепная реакция, как, вы знаете, ядерная реакция цепная, вот начиная с дробления. Так и здесь. И это вот был какой-то неприостанавливающийся процесс. Люди, не все люди задумывались, куда они едут и на что они едут. Я думаю, что это действительно последний исход.
Непривычное, конечно, чувство, страшное ощущение. До последней минуты как-то не могу еще в это поверить, что через несколько минут, буквально часов, мать будет по ту сторону. Тут все-таки страх за будущее наших детей. И тут причина не в Азербайджане, а в причине во всей неустроенности нашей страны. Мы не знаем, что здесь будет завтра. Мы не знаем, будет ли союз, не будет ли союза, будет ли, где мы будем жить, в каком ситуации мы будем жить, понимаете? Это страх за будущее.
Что я чувствую? Я расстаюсь со своей родиной. У меня родина одна. Я не уверена, что я обрету другую родину. Просто я это делаю за своих детей.
There are probably more than 3 million Jews in the Soviet Union. In a survey, 3/4 said they would like to leave. The reasons they give are many: the rise of anti-Semitism, the failure of the economy, the fear of ethnic unrest. But the true roots of today's emigration lie much deeper and further in the past. This exodus is the inevitable final chapter of a story which began more than 100 years ago. This film is about that story.
In 1881, after chasing him around the country for about 2 years, dynamiting trains, blowing up the Winter Palace in parts, a group of social revolutionaries finally assassinates Tsar Alexander II. And this is followed about a month later, after a period of great drift and uncertainty, by an outbreak of anti-Jewish riots throughout the southern parts of the Russian Empire. These are the famous pogroms. Indeed, it's a Russian term, and it becomes kind of generic for anti-Jewish violence. They occur in literally hundreds of big towns, small communities, and they're most significant, I think, not because of the loss of life, because it's relatively small. It's largely property that's destroyed, but just drawing into question the possibility of a viable Jewish existence in the Russian Empire.
In the late 19th century, most Jews in the world still lived in Europe, in the German, Austrian, and by far the largest number in the Russian Empire, which included Poland. There they were restricted by the Tsar's laws to the Pale of Settlement, the religious no-man's land between Catholic West and Russian Orthodox East. An area much fought over in past centuries. It was to be much fought over again in our own times. In the 3 decades after 1881, the Pale of Settlement suffered more than 50 pogroms. The last living survivor of the Simferopol pogrom of 1905 is 92-year-old Yakov Rapoport.
Отец был учителем. У него была школа. И первый, я считаю, отсчет своего времени и своих наблюдений с того момента, когда отца изувечили на еврейском погроме в 1905 году. Он случайно уцелел, то есть он случайно выжил, потому что одна наша знакомая, отыскивая трупы убитых евреев в морге полиции, услышала стон одного из тех, кого городовые приволокли туда, в морг, считая его умершим. Но это был мой отец, который потерял сознание при избиении погромщиков. И я вспоминаю совершенно ярко вот эту картину, когда ей удалось доставить его домой на такой, что ли, пролетке. И я помню это, когда его выносили, вижу, как сейчас его окровавленное совершенно лицо, болтающиеся руки, как плети. В этом погроме было убито 48 евреев, пострадавших от рук погромщиков.
And of course, this then forces a response from the Jewish community, which is already rethinking what it is to be a Jew in the Russian Empire. Of course, for the vast mass of Russian Jewry, like people everywhere, they're not political, they're not activists, they just hunker down and wait, try to survive in whatever way that they can. But a number of activists, especially intellectuals, say, no, we've got to be able to do better than this. And one finds, for the first time, really, the emergence of a political Zionism, of the idea that the appropriate thing for Jews to do now is to assert their national value and self-worth, and they can do it best by settling, perhaps in Palestine. This is, in fact, the usual point of focus, because, of course, of the long tradition that it has in the Jewish world and the Jewish mind. There are also those who say, this is all well and good. Theoretically, building a homeland in Palestine is nice, but there's not enough room. The political difficulties are too overwhelming. We've got to leave now, and we've got to do it in a way where we can take many people out. And the obvious place to go is to either Europe or somewhere else. In America, wide open spaces, encouraging population, no difficulties with going there is an obvious choice.
Between 1880 and 1914, over 2 million Jews emigrated to the United States, mostly settling in New York City. Life in the New World couldn't have been more different from life in old Russia, still obsessed as it was with medieval fantasies about the Jews. In 1913, the age-old accusation of blood sacrifice was leveled at them once again. A Jewish tailor from Kiev, Menachem Mendel Baylis, was brought to trial, accused of the ritual murder of a young Christian boy.
Я вспоминаю реакцию вот того моего класса, учеников моего класса. Большая часть относились равнодушно к этому, это русские. Но некоторые яростно убеждали, что нет, евреи употребляют христианскую кровь. Я до сих пор, вот передо мной стоит лицо одного мальчишки. Я помню, что это был эстонец, фамилию его помню, Пайо, который с пеной у рта мне пытался доказать, что нет, евреи употребляют христианскую кровь. И особенно то, что было вот в моем классе, оно отображает все то, что происходило вообще в массах больших.
The trial jury had been chosen from amongst the least educated and most religious of the local townspeople. The Tsarist government made it clear that it wanted a verdict of guilty.
Это решение суда, это было по существу роковым для целой нации, потому что целой нации угрожало большое несчастье, признание вот этого изуверства такого. И я помню напряжение и у нас в семье, я помню и напряжение лично во мне, в моем, как я ждал этого вердикта здесь, потому что за этим вердиктом должны были последовать еще и погромы, конечно. И к большому огорчению царского правительства присяжные заседатели, это полуграмотная масса религиозных людей, они вынесли Бейлису оправдательный вердикт.
This is a period of great idealism, of the idea that we can really change this world that we're stuck with, and all varieties of socialism. There are the essentially the agrarian-based socialists. There are the terrorists who've assassinated the Tsar, but we're beginning to see the first Marxists come along as well. And this, of course, is state-of-the-art revolutionary thought, and so it elicits a great deal of excitement, interest, emulation in the Russian Empire. Especially among, I have to keep stressing, among intellectuals. And we find then Jews entering into the revolutionary movement. Again, this allows anti-Semites then to say, well, all the revolutionary leaders are Jews, or most of the revolutionary leaders are Jews, which is, of course, as I've suggested, not true at all. But the fact that a few Jews do emerge in very prominent positions then allows this assumption to gain a good deal of credence. And I think, in particular, a person like Trotsky, who is identifiably Jewish, identified by that as that by his enemies, who comes to symbolize the Bolshevik movement. If one looks at the propaganda at the time, one finds that it focuses not so much on Lenin, who's a kind of humble, nondescript individual, but Trotsky, who's a kind of demonic figure, and especially as the leader of the Red Army, even more so. The fact that Marx was from the Jewish community ties very nicely everything up. The products of disillusion that are destroying the old society, the things that are important in the world, socialism, comes from the Jews, already seen as a disruptive force. There's a long tradition, of course, of the Jews as the other in society, as the element that is a continued reproach to the existence of the Christian world.
Somebody who is different has to explain themselves. Why are they different? And the Jews are, all the accusations against the Jews are really immaterial because they are accused of being revolutionaries and capitalists. They're accused of being clannish and of being too open, of trying to assimilate, penetrate everywhere. They're accused of being intellectuals, they're accused of being boors. They're accused of being poor and they're accused of being rich. All these accusations are not a real thing, you see. What is real is the idea that the Jews should really be like everyone else, and they aren't. They have their own culture, they have their own history, they have their own civilization. They want to keep it, or at least most of them do, and that is what makes them different.
At the turn of the century, that difference was seen by many as a mortal danger. It still is. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion first appeared in 1905. New editions and translations are still being published today.
It's actually an elaborate forgery doctored up from some French publicistic works and some ideas that are rattling around in the Russian Empire as well that come from novels and third-rate fiction. But they purport to show a Jewish plot to take over and to dominate the entire Christian, I'll underline Christian world, using all of the devices of the modern world. And so in a sense, this is a wonderful weapon for anti-Semites. It makes sense of everything. You can take all the evils of the world and attribute them to the Jews, and here in fact is this master plan which seeks to, or purportedly shows exactly what the Jews are up to.
February 1917, the word freedom resounded in the streets. The autocracy is overthrown in Russia. At the time, we're not aware that power had been seized by the bourgeoisie, who set up a provisional government.
Были вот там, в этом же Таврическом дворце, раздавалось оружие восставшим рабочим, и я получил там, как тоже принимал участие, получил пистолет «Кольт», великолепный пистолет, тяжелый, и получил австрийскую винтовку, и вместе с рабочими объезжал на машине старых царских министров, там, которые очень были рады, что их отвозили в Государственную Думу, потому что они больше всего боялись народа, что как бы их не растерзали.
The February Revolution finally swept away the Romanovs, and with them their restrictions on the Jews. It was the end of the Pale of Settlement. Now the Jews spread all over Russia, taking with them the memory of the cities that had nurtured their culture and their traditions. Even today, it's a matter of pride to be able to say, I am a Jew from Odessa. Odessa embodied one vision of Jewish life, the secular ideal. It was a place bursting with ideas, a center of the Jewish Enlightenment, of early Zionism, of socialism, of the arts. Elsewhere, rabbis warned that its Jews were lost souls. Around Odessa, they said, burn the fires of hell.
Odessa itself was a wonderful city, a wide-open, growing boom town, sometimes called the Russian Chicago. Links to the outside world, lots of foreigners living and resident there. Cosmopolitan, had an opera house where it was said Jews in traditional garb every once in a while turned up. And that illustrates very nicely that the Jews were part of Odessa. It was certainly a town that had an identifiably Jewish flavor. It should have. They were about a third of the population. So, in stark contrast to all of the other Jewish centers of the Pale of Settlement, Odessa was the most wide open. And so we find Jews participating fully in the life of the city. They participate in the administration of the city. They are to be found at the schools, at New Russia University. They are prominent in business. They are prominent in the arts. There's a unique Jewish subculture. There are Jewish criminals, for example, on the waterfront that are chronicled Benya Creek in Babel's Odessa Tales. Everything that had anything to do with Odessa touched the Jews in some way, shape, or form as well.
Isaac Babel lived here from the age of 11. His Odessa Tales is a nostalgic evocation of the city's pre-revolutionary days.
All the folk in our circle, brokers, shopkeepers, clerks in banks and steamship offices, used to have their children taught music. It was simply a mania. Our fathers, aware of being failures, instituted a lottery. They built it on the bones of children. Odessa, to a greater degree than other cities, was possessed by this craze. And indeed, in the course of decades, our town supplied the concert stages of the world with child prodigies. Misha Elman, Zimbalist, Gavrilovich, all came from Odessa. And it was there that Yasha Heifetz made his debut.
The Jewish quarter of Odessa in which Babel lived was called the Moldovanka. It was a poor district, but what it lacked in material wealth was more than made up for by the vibrancy of its cultural life. Here, musicians, traders, and craftsmen rub shoulders with rabbis and